right, so I think we'll get started here. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming director at the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday, Osterville Fall Fest. Today, we have an exciting program called The History of Roller Skating with Emma Levy, also known as Cha-Cha. So, without further ado, take it away, Cha-Cha.
Thank you. I will get to some ideas about why my name is Cha-Cha, other than I like to dance. That's another history. So here we are for the history of roller skating. We're going to delve mainly into when the skate began, how it evolved, and how it moved into the United States history. So because I am not more involved of different parts of the world, such as Canada, I will implore others in the audience to add any bits of history that they have, because I believe in oral history. So as we begin, we have some pretty amazing groups of people who started this. Roller skating actually began in Europe. It began with a gentleman called Mr. Merlin, who was sort of from the upper elite. He wanted very much to sort of always be the center of attention when he was going to parties. And so Merlin would always come up with like a lavish costume or something. And so one day he decided, I'm gonna stick some wheels on my feet and I'm gonna go into this party. And he ended up being someone who crashed into the dinner table, ruined the dinner party, and became pretty much a heel of society at that point. But needless to say, the idea of wheels on your feet and creating that motion was born. It slowly evolved in Europe and traveled. It traveled over. Now, we were talking about the idea of ice skates and having that blade. So most inventors at the time utilized it to invent it after the ice skate. So we had up here, as you can see, and it almost looks like today's modern rollerblade. The one thing about it is there was a stationary movement, so you could not get that shift and sway. It sort of didn't have much in its popularity other than sort of a novelty for years and years, until about the 1860s. And when in 1864, a man named George Plimpton got very sick. And he had, not sure exactly what he had, but he ended up being someone who was sick for about a year. And his doctor said, you know what you need to do? You need to go ice skate. And so he spent about 6 months ice skating and rehabbing himself. And so my guess is he had some sort of a lung infection of the time. And that process cleared him. And then all of a sudden the weather warmed and the ponds became, they came back and he didn't want to stop. And so he found these rollerblades. And so, but they weren't working the same as the ice skate because they were a little bit more choppy because they didn't move in the same lateral motion. So he invented today's modern roller skate. And Mr. Plimpton was no heel, where he patented his. And so he decided at about 1864 that he created the first rocking skate. And recognizing the potential of this invention, he really pushed it, where once he got better, he decided to create this wonderful invention, utilize it as something almost like a health elixir and something that doctors could use and revolutionize basically how it was used in society. This ingenuity here, obviously, we still had different inventions that went along with this, but that original patent always came back to Mr. Plimpton of the rocking motion of the skate. So you had some that could work for children. and some that could work for all others and create these ways of movement. Within that, probably about 30 to 40 years, it became something that people could congregate. And more societal, there could be avenues of getting together. And everyone would grab your roller skates. It was always ladylike to still don on a pair of roller skates. Mr. Plimpton started to make a heck of a lot of money for that. Within those, he decided to continue to invest that money. And so he started to make roller rinks. And roller rinks popped up all over the place. Roller rinks were something that became a craze all over the United States. And perhaps all over everywhere. Or it became something that was a popularity that grew and grew. It was perfect for dancing. You could do couples dancing, and became something within the Depression era, was a form of almost culture, I would say. So paving the way within that Depression era, it helped with a lot of sort of, I would say, ability for different societies and different ways for communities to get out and about. With war and with a lot of strife in America at that time, there were certain levels of roller skating that became an active part within each segmented, not segmented group, but within each city and each different part of the United States. There were ways that within New York City, women would go out and they would roller skate for protest. And there would also be this wonderful fashionable again in certain areas that it would be almost part of showing this athleticism for an elite members of our world, where it almost was that fashionable way. And this also became something where, as were continued, people needed something to do. And so a lot of these rinks and the rink owners who were like, I've gotta pay my bills and I've gotta make sure I can fill the rink continuously, decided they had to keep people coming in with a more theatrical way. And so therefore, ideas such as endurance races and community contests began, where people would skate for days on end and never stop skating. And then there would be different sorts of how long or how far could you jump certain things within that community. With this time in the 20s also, there was roads being built. And there were certain areas that had more and more ways of sidewalk and different avenues for roller skating to become a method of travel. And so at the time of the 20s and 30s, this roller skating became something that people might say, okay, well, I gotta go to work. They're roller skating to work. This thus in ways created and continued the culture. Within wartime continuing at the 1930s, we had more and more need for, in the United States, like, I think it's USO, sort of wartime shows to rally the people at home, because I think there was a lot of folks who were really poor, husbands, fathers were away, and they had no money. And so at this time, these roller rinks and these large groups of folks decided to kind of naturally come together and create shows. And within these shows, they had sort of an idea to rally the troops. And the United States government would give money to certain groups where they could travel around the United States and create wonderful, almost I'd say like, not like Vegas showgirl sorts of things, but in the way of USO classic shows. Within that, they had sort of this idea of these beautiful, fantastic, and outlandish shows where it was 3 skaters piled on top of each other. I have a history book that I believe I'll pass around at the end to look at. It's very fragile, but it has some fantastic pictures of these shows. And so this is about the time where, as those USO traveling around, we have the 1940s, which is a really fantastic time for roller skating. And it was where there were a lot of partner dancing and cultural ways that roller skating, especially in cities, became somewhat of again, that higher elite form of entertainment. Because roller skating shifted where it was either something where it was sort of an elite activity, or it became something that was in a need where the community needed something to lift it up. And so we see that it's sort of decade by decade swayed in that way. In the 1940s, it had that idea of connection where we needed husbands and wives and people to connect with each other in a safe and appropriate way. And that way was roller dancing and on the roller rinks. It also had this era of sort of like not Superman, but at the same time that these comic books were coming out, it was along that lines too. And there's a lot of history where you can see in certain comic books, roller skates in it. And that part of the culture intertwined. Roller skates really tended to intertwine within other parts of history. And so, I went the wrong way, excuse me. These are, they continue to have these wonderful shows, elaborate shows too, which I'd love to see if there was that Las Vegas connection to some of these where a lot of performers just ended up all congregating together. That might be another history. But up to the right ended up that once in about the 1950s, roller skating was becoming in decline. It ended up being more for children. And it started though becoming a little more that it was like a sport. And so those factions of whether you were an artistic skater, whether you became that speed skater, or whether you had these leagues where you had hometown recreation leagues. And so this was someone I think it was Agawam, I'm not sure, but it was a local roller skating club. Here are some more performers of the times where I believe there's some pictures. Now my history of roller skating, I am a roller derby player, but I had the wonderful chance to meet a lot of different roller skaters in my life. And one of the children I coached, their grandmother was one of these dancers.
Oh,
And so the connection of that was very fantastic to see, especially because they were able to talk about things together. And that was really beautiful. Gloria Nord was pretty much like, I don't know if you know Taylor Swift or anyone like that right there. But pretty much in the 50s, Gloria was that showgirl. And she had the beautiful razzle dazzle that was different of the time. And these larger shows were something that kind of were offset of the big film industry. So you saw these things, but I believe a lot of that came and intertwined itself again. Oh, I've never used this lovely wand. And more USO shows continued through the 50s. And they would go a lot more into rural towns. And the population dwindled of those that were interested in roller skating other than that outlandish way. But the good news is there were still continued populations that made it something that even any ladies were allowed, and it was ladylike to always roller skate. And then came a different era of roller skating where it no longer was just for transportation, and it no longer was for that community. It shifted itself into a sight and sound experience. Within the 60s and 70s, outfits changed pretty much for everyone anyway, and as they did for roller skaters. Along that line as well, in the 1960s, industry had changed. Roads were being built, much more effective, parkways being built. So the idea of outdoor skating and outdoor skating communities emerged. Within the 60s, there was a lot of skateboarding and skate parks emerging. Along with that, they don't really talk about how the roller skating was right alongside that skateboard. And there was some amazing skate park athletes. Also within that was the roller rink. Now, the roller rink became something within the 1950s as the civil rights movement shifted itself. Rinks were also very much became segregated and then integrated. And so as these spaces shifted, where originally each community had its own method, its own system of skating, its own way. Thank you. These cultures emerged on a floor, and within that created an entirely new and entirely different way that people experience their culture in America. And for that, that was very special. And I think that today is still being held in a lot of spaces in a lot of cities in the United States. There are specific cities such as Chicago and Atlanta and down in Florida and Miami and out west in Venice Beach. They all have specific styles of roller skating. So you can go to Chicago and there's some JD skater styles there that they're so fantastic. There's also the Atlanta style that right now I'm like saving my money to go visit, to see if I can go and explore that wonderful space. Because these are dancers, and this is something that has its own specific styles. And yes, here we are with skate parks emerging. These are some fantastic, amazing skaters. And I didn't write their names down, I'm sorry. But really, we have quite an amazing evolution of roller skating that started with those communities and then shifted into skate parks. And that skate park culture is really alive and well and very big right now. We also have artistic skating, where the Roller Skating Association International has national championships every year. And that artistic skating is something that is a physical form that I am still working on myself as a skater because it's so disciplined. There's also roller disco. And so the roller discos were started in the 60s and 70s and continued into that early 80s. There was a lot of wonderful sort of bringing back to that light idea of society and interplaying, and also idea that roller disco and roller jam skating was developed as a legitimate dance style. So there's things that people developed within the rink that you do, where people will be skating around at a really high speed and they have to skate on one wheel at a time and make sure they skate on every single wheel and their partner watches them. And there's different levels of, we all know Shoot the Duck. You remember Shoot the Duck? Maybe I won't do it right now, but we'll try. And then of course there's the fantastic roller disco where they got to wear the leotards. This is a current skater. This is Rock from Rock's World, who is a fantastic teacher of modern day jam style and JV skating. And this gentleman down here is, I think I read an article, these skaters have such amazing style, and I believe he was in 3 or 4 movies of the time in the 70s. He worked for the city of Los Angeles as a garbage man most of the week, 5 days a week, and then would go and get the chance to be in these incredible movies. Interesting. So as we shifted into that idea back again, most people, just like George Plimpton, remembered, oh, this is really good for me. And this is really good for my system. And so again, in the 80s, roller skating became something that people did as they went down in the city, or they would skate into parks. That's where larger communities outdoor became a space where you might have a canal skate. As you can see, here I am enjoying the lovely Cape Cod Canal. It's a beautiful place for all to enjoy. And that is also where places, even in Atlanta, they have the great Atlanta Beltway, which is a wonderful space. In Venice, there is, or in Long Beach, California, there's this wonderful boardwalk, and they have an outdoor rink specifically set up for roller skating and roller. And so those communities are being supported again, and that part is really fantastic. And then, of course, there's the more, I guess you would say, fast-paced style of roller skating, which started with those endurance, remember in the 30s where people said, oh, I gotta make things exciting for people so they'll come and sit in the chairs. And so in the 30s, it started, roller derby was begun with those endurance. And we had someone who started where they wore a star on their head and they had to get past all the other skaters. And so you had this idea of speed and agility. And we see that this evolved slowly. After that, it became more of sort of like a WrestleMania idea, where there was that idea of still physicality and still a really amount of, but we know certain people were going to win and that part. And then it continued as much where there was still local roller derby, even in the 70s. And then it slowly, within the 1980s, died out. Within Texas, I believe, in the 2000s, 2008 or 9, there was a group of women who decided to make the modern day game of roller derby. So originally, when you see these ones here, they were put onto a banked track so you could speed. And so Mr. Plimpton said, oh, we're gonna bank track so people could come to the one and only space. And so these women in Texas decided and said, wait a minute, all I have is this concrete slab area or this floor, we're gonna mark out a track. And so the modern day game of roller derby began. And just like basketball or just like soccer, it can be played anywhere in a big enough space. So as roller derby within the past 10 years, which I'm lucky enough, I started in 2013, has evolved drastically. If you know hockey, they have major and minor penalties at one point, and then I think they abolished that. There was still major and minor penalties in roller derby up until 2012, 2010, yes. And so roller derby currently has thousands and thousands of competitive teams all over the world. Canada has one of, I wish I had a picture of her, one of the best skaters. I mean, Montreal, Australia, Europe. It's a wonderful world sport. I went prior to the pandemic, right before the pandemic, I was lucky enough to referee for a game between Team Connecticut and Team Iceland. And so we went over to Iceland and met these wonderful Icelandic Vikings, who I thought were going to be scary, but they were not. They were absolutely lovely. And what a gift geothermic energy is. And we could all take a lesson on that. But within this time as well, those women in Texas, probably half of them might have had children. These children grew up and formed junior teams. So we now have, I believe, like within the United States, 200 junior roller derby teams through the Junior Roller Derby Association. It's a sport that girls and boys can play together, or they can have just girl and boys in either open or not, but it allows for, again, small communities to get together on whatever space they have. And it's pretty fantastic. And within that as well, so you have that artistic skating, you have skate parks, you have roller derby, and then within the 70s, I believe up until the 80s, and I believe in many, many other parts of the world, this is still going strong, there's quad hockey. Now, it is different than roller hockey. This is called quad hockey. I believe they do not wear helmets up until now. Right, it's very, very, so the hockey, they might, but maybe they don't wear face protectors, which I still think is not smart. They do wear helmets, but they don't cover their face, and it's pretty astounding. It is a hockey rink and it's played on wood inside. But up until, I believe, the 1970s or early 80s, there's gentlemen in this community that remember quad hockey. So it was very popular. We also have speed skating. And speed skating was very, very popular. It was also, I believe our amazing representative Kip Diggs around here was a speed skater. And we had a chance to discuss how much roller skating as a youth was really wonderful, and we were lucky to have that choice. I believe it helped me a lot. So I don't know if you have any questions. I sort of flew through that because I'm very nervous and I get excited. Thank you so much.
It used to be